I never imagined that at 68 years old I'd discover my own son thought of me as nothing more than a burden. The words hit me like a physical blow, spoken so casually to his friends in my own kitchen while I was supposed to be napping upstairs. Honestly, guys, Mom's becoming such a hassle. Always showing up, always wanting to help with Mia, always asking about our finances. I mean, I get it. She's lonely since Dad died, but we have our own lives to live. The laughter that followed still echoes in my mind, sharp and cruel. That moment changed everything between us, and what I did next surprised even me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Lyn Patterson, and if you told me 5 years ago that I'd be standing in my son's kitchen feeling like an unwelcome stranger, I would have laughed. Back then, David still called me every Sunday, still brought his wife Jessica and their daughter Mia over for my famous apple cinnamon rolls every other weekend. Back then, I was Mom, not a burden. I suppose I should start from the beginning, though the beginning feels like a lifetime ago now. I'm 68, which some people consider old, but I've never felt more alive or more sure of myself than I do today. My hair has gone completely silver, something I stopped fighting 3 years ago when I realized it actually made my green eyes look brighter. I'm not a tall woman, 5'3" on a good day, but I've always carried myself with purpose. You have to, when you've spent the last 22 years running your own business. Sweet Memories Bakery sits on the corner of Maple and 3rd Street in Portland, Oregon, in a brick building that was falling apart when I first laid eyes on it. The previous owner, an elderly man named Mr. Chen, had run a small grocery store there for 30 years before his arthritis forced him to sell. I remember standing outside that building in the rain. It always seems to be raining in Portland, with my late husband Robert, both of us wondering if I'd completely lost my mind. "Lyn, honey," Robert had said, his arm around my shoulders as we stared at the peeling paint and cracked windows. "Are you absolutely sure about this? We could use the insurance money for something more sensible." The insurance money. That's what started it all, really. Robert had been diagnosed with heart disease when David was 24, and just starting his career in marketing. The doctors gave us 5 years, maybe more if we were lucky. We got 3. 3 years of treatments, specialists, hope, and heartbreak. When Robert finally passed, the life insurance payout was substantial. Enough to buy a nice house in the suburbs, enough to travel, enough to retire comfortably. Instead, I bought a rundown building and turned it into the bakery I'd been dreaming about since I was a little girl helping my grandmother knead bread dough on Saturday mornings. Robert had always encouraged that dream, even when it seemed impractical. "You make magic in the kitchen, Lyn," he used to say. "Someday, you should share that magic with the world." Those first few years were brutal. I was 46 years old, learning to run a business while grieving my husband and trying to maintain some semblance of a relationship with David, who thought I'd gone temporarily insane. He was working for a small marketing firm in downtown Portland then, sharing a cramped apartment with 2 roommates, trying to establish himself in his career. He'd stop by the bakery after work sometimes, usually to lecture me about fiscal responsibility or to suggest I sell the place and, quote, invest the money properly. "Mom, you're not getting any younger," he'd say, surveying the flour-dusted counters and the industrial ovens that seemed to break down every other week. "What happens when you can't do this anymore? What's your retirement plan?" I didn't have a good answer then. I was too busy learning how to manage inventory, handle suppliers, deal with health inspectors, and master the ancient cash register that Mr. Chen had left behind. I was too busy discovering that I loved getting up at 4 in the morning to start the bread, loved the smell of yeast and cinnamon that clung to my clothes, loved watching customers' faces light up when they bit into one of my pastries. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. But David was practical, like his father in some ways, though Robert had always balanced his practicality with unwavering support for my dreams. David seemed to have inherited only the worry without the faith. When he met Jessica during his 3rd year at the marketing firm, she reinforced his concerns about my risky venture. Jessica is beautiful in that polished, professional way that intimidates other women. Blonde hair, always perfectly styled, manicured nails, designer clothes that somehow never seem to wrinkle or stain. She worked in real estate and had opinions about everything, especially about what she considered poor financial decisions. "Your mother is sweet," she told David within my hearing during one of their early visits to the bakery. "But starting a business at her age? It's just not realistic. She should sell this place before it fails and she loses everything." I pretended not to hear, focusing instead on boxing up the chocolate croissants they'd come to pick up. But the words stung because, deep down, I wondered if they were right. The first 2 years were a constant struggle. Equipment failures, slow months where I barely broke even, the learning curve of running a small business in a competitive market. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I should cut my losses and find something safer, more predictable. Then, slowly, things began to turn around. My apple cinnamon rolls became legendary in the neighborhood. Office workers started stopping by for their morning coffee, and one of my blueberry muffins. The local coffee shop began ordering my pastries to sell alongside their drinks. Word spread through the community about the widow who made the best bread in Portland, and Sweet Memories Bakery started to feel less like a desperate gamble and more like a real business. David's wedding to Jessica was a small affair, held in a hotel ballroom downtown. I remember feeling proud but slightly out of place among her polished family and friends. Her parents, both successful professionals, were polite to me but clearly puzzled by my career choice. At the reception, Jessica's father asked me about my little hobby, and when I corrected him that it was actually my business, he smiled indulgently and changed the subject. The first few years of their marriage were good between us. David had settled into a better position at a larger marketing agency, and Jessica was building her real estate career. They lived in a nice apartment in one of the trendy neighborhoods, and we maintained a comfortable distance. Sunday dinners once a month, phone calls every couple of weeks, the occasional request for my famous dinner rolls for a dinner party they were hosting. Everything changed when Mia was born 6 years ago. Jessica had a difficult pregnancy and an even more challenging delivery. She was on bed rest for the final 2 months, and David was overwhelmed trying to manage his demanding job while caring for his wife. That's when I stepped in, the way any mother would. I started bringing meals to their apartment, helping with grocery shopping, cleaning when Jessica was too exhausted to manage. After Mia arrived, a beautiful baby girl with David's dark hair and Jessica's blue eyes, I became the grandmother I'd always dreamed of being. I babysat when they needed date nights, brought homemade baby food when Mia started solids, and was always available for emergencies. Looking back now, I can see how gradually the dynamic shifted. What started as temporary help during a difficult time became expected routine. Jessica returned to work when Mia was 3 months old, and I found myself watching my granddaughter 2 or 3 days a week while they navigated childcare arrangements. When their first nanny didn't work out, I filled in for 2 weeks. When the daycare raised their prices beyond what they could comfortably afford, I offered to contribute to the cost. It felt natural, helping my only child and his family. I had the time, the energy, and certainly the love. My business was thriving by then. Steady customers, reliable income, even enough profit to expand my offerings and hire 2 part-time employees. I could afford to help, and it brought me joy to see Mia growing up happy and secure. But somewhere along the way, my help became an expectation rather than a gift. The grateful phone calls became requests, then demands. "Mom, can you take Mia this weekend? We have plans." "Mom, Jessica needs you to bring dinner Tuesday. She's showing houses all day." "Mom, we're a little short on the rent this month because of Jessica's car repair. Can you help us out?" I said yes to almost everything. How could I not? David was my son, my only child, and Mia was the light of my life. Every Thursday afternoon, when I picked her up from preschool and brought her to the bakery, she'd sit on a stool behind the counter and help me decorate cookies. Her small hands would carefully place sprinkles on sugar cookies, while she chattered about her friends, her toys, her parents. Those moments were precious to me, worth any inconvenience or expense. The requests for financial help became more frequent over the past 2 years. David's agency had gone through layoffs, and while he kept his job, his salary was reduced. Jessica's real estate career had its ups and downs depending on the market. They'd moved from their apartment into a rented house in a better school district for Mia, but the mortgage was stretching their budget thin. I helped because I could, and because I wanted my granddaughter to grow up in a safe, stable environment. A few hundred here for an unexpected car repair. 1,000 there when Jessica needed dental work not covered by insurance. Several hundred monthly to help with Mia's after-school activities and daycare costs. It wasn't breaking my budget. The bakery was more successful than I'd ever imagined it could be, but it was adding up to a significant amount over time. My best friend Carol, who runs the flower shop 3 blocks down from Sweet Memories, had been gently warning me about the pattern for months. We've been friends for over a decade, bonding initially over the challenges of running small businesses as single women in our 50s and 60s. Carol is straightforward in a way that can be uncomfortable but is usually exactly what I need to hear. "Lyn, honey," she said one afternoon as we shared coffee and leftover pastries in my bakery after closing time, "I love you like a sister, but you're being taken advantage of. When was the last time David came to see you just because he wanted to spend time with his mother? When was the last time they invited you over for dinner without needing something from you?" I defended them, of course. David was busy with work. Jessica was building her career. They had a young child to manage. It was natural that they'd need help, and I was lucky to be in a position to provide it. But Carol's questions lingered in my mind, especially during the quiet moments when I was alone in my small apartment above the bakery. The apartment isn't much, just 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and a living room that doubles as my home office. But it's been home for over 20 years now. I moved there after selling the house I'd shared with Robert, needing something smaller and more manageable as I focused on building the business. The walls are covered with photos of David growing up, his wedding pictures, and dozens of shots of Mia at every age from newborn to her current 6 years old. Every morning I wake up at 4:30 to start the bread and pastries for the day. By 6, the bakery is filled with the scents of fresh baked goods, and by 7, we're open for business. It's a routine I've maintained for over 2 decades, and I love every moment of it. My customers have become friends, my employees feel like family, and the work gives me purpose and joy. But increasingly, my schedule revolved around David and Jessica's needs. Thursday afternoons with Mia, Saturday mornings when they needed to run errands, emergency babysitting when their regular sitter canceled, Sunday dinners that I cooked and hosted because it's so much easier at your place, Mom. I found myself planning my time around their requests, closing the bakery early, or asking my employees to handle things so I could be available for my family. The morning that changed everything started like any other. It was a Thursday in late October, and I was supposed to pick up Mia from school at 3 and keep her until evening while David and Jessica attended some work event. I'd planned to let her help me prepare the special Halloween cookies I was featuring that week, little pumpkins with orange icing and chocolate chip ghosts. But around noon, I started feeling dizzy and nauseous. By 2 o'clock, I could barely stand up straight. Food poisoning, I suspected, probably from the seafood salad I'd tried at the new restaurant down the street the night before. I called David to let them know I couldn't take Mia, expecting understanding and maybe a little concern for my health. "Mom, you can't be serious," was his immediate response. "Jessica and I both have important meetings this afternoon. We're counting on you." I explained that I was genuinely ill, that I could barely function, much less care for a 6-year-old. Could they perhaps ask one of their friends, or see if Jessica's mother was available? Jessica's mom is in Seattle for the week, and our friends all work. "Mom, can't you just push through it? It's only for a few hours." Push through food poisoning to babysit while they attended work events. The suggestion was so absurd, so dismissive of my well-being, that I was momentarily speechless. When I insisted that I was too sick to care for Mia safely, David's frustration was obvious. "Fine," he said with a heavy sigh. "I guess I'll have to leave work early." "This is really inconvenient, Mom." That word, inconvenient, stayed with me long after he hung up. I spent the rest of that day in bed, alternating between nausea and a growing sense of unease about my relationship with my son and his family. When had I become an inconvenience rather than a help? When had my genuine illness become a problem for them to solve rather than a concern for my welfare? The next morning, feeling much better, I decided to stop by their house with some of Mia's favorite cookies, as an apology for the previous day's disruption. I also wanted to check on them, to see if they'd managed okay without my help, maybe to talk to David about his reaction to my illness. I knocked on the front door, but no one answered. David's car was in the driveway, and I could hear voices and laughter from inside. The front door was unlocked. They lived in a safe neighborhood and often left it open during the day, so I let myself in, calling out a greeting as I entered. "David? Jessica? It's Mom. I brought cookies for Mia." No response, but the voices were coming from the kitchen. I walked through the living room, past Mia's toys scattered across the carpet, toward the sound of conversation. I was almost to the kitchen doorway when I heard my son's voice clearly, speaking to what sounded like several people. "Honestly, guys, Mom's becoming such a hassle." I stopped dead in my tracks, the container of cookies suddenly heavy in my hands. Always showing up, always wanting to help with Mia, always asking about our finances. I mean, I get it. She's lonely since Dad died, but we have our own lives to live. The laughter that followed was like a physical blow. Multiple voices, probably his work colleagues, finding humor in my devotion to my family. "And don't get me started on the guilt trips," David continued. "If we don't invite her to something, or if we can't use her babysitting services, she gets all wounded and starts talking about how she just wants to be helpful. It's exhausting." Another voice, unfamiliar to me, chimed in. "Dude, that's rough. My mother-in-law's the same way. They just don't understand boundaries." "Exactly." David's voice was animated now, feeding off the sympathy. "Like yesterday, she claimed she was too sick to watch Mia. Too sick. I mean, come on, it's not like I was asking her to run a marathon. Just watch TV with a 6-year-old for a few hours. But no, suddenly she's at death's door. More laughter." Someone made a joke about dramatic mothers, and David readily agreed. "The thing is, we really depend on her help, you know? She contributes to Mia's daycare, helps with bills sometimes, watches her all the time. It's incredibly useful, but then she acts like we owe her something for it. Like she chose to help. We didn't force her." I stood frozen in the hallway, each word cutting deeper than the last. This was how my son saw me. Not as a loving mother and grandmother, but as a needy, manipulative burden who guilted him into accepting help he didn't appreciate. The help I'd given freely, joyfully, out of love for him and Mia, was reduced to something useful that came with unwanted strings attached. "The worst part," David continued, and I could hear him moving around the kitchen, probably getting drinks for his friends, "is that she has this whole successful business, right? Like, she's not actually dependent on us or anything. She chose to sell her house and live in that tiny apartment above her bakery. She chose to spend all her time working. And now she acts like we're her whole social life, like we're responsible for entertaining her." "Have you tried talking to her about it?" Another voice asked. "Jessica has. A little. But you know how it is with mothers. They don't listen. They just hear criticism and get defensive. It's easier to just manage the situation, you know? Use the help when we need it, but try to maintain some distance. Use the help when we need it, but maintain distance." I felt like I might be sick again, but this time it had nothing to do with food poisoning. This was my son, the little boy I'd raised alone after his father died, the young man I'd supported through college and early career struggles, the father whose child I adored and helped care for constantly. "At least she's good with Mia," David added, and for a moment I hoped for some redemption, some acknowledgement of the love I poured into my relationship with my granddaughter. Though sometimes I wonder if she's too involved there too. Mia talks about Grandma Lyn constantly, wants to go to the bakery all the time, compares everything to how Grandma does it. It's like she's trying to replace Jessica as the primary female figure in Mia's life. That accusation was so unfair, so completely wrong, that I had to grip the wall to steady myself. I had never, not once, tried to undermine Jessica's role as Mia's mother. I supported their parenting decisions, deferred to their rules, made sure Mia understood that her parents were the ultimate authority in her life. But I loved her, openly and completely, and apparently that was threatening rather than supportive. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with David's friends sharing their own stories of difficult family members and offering advice on managing, quote, boundary issues with parents. I heard every word, but they blurred together into a painful cacophony of dismissal and complaint. Finally, I heard chairs scraping and voices moving toward the front of the house. David was walking his colleagues out, still laughing about something one of them had said. I realized I had two choices: confront him immediately, or leave and process what I'd heard before deciding how to respond. I chose to leave. Moving as quietly as I could, I slipped out the back door and walked around to the front of the house, where I could see David saying goodbye to three men in business suits. They were still chuckling about something as they got into their cars. David watched them drive away, then turned to go back inside. He saw me approaching from the sidewalk and smiled, the same warm smile that had been melting my heart for 32 years. "Mom, what brings you by? Feeling better?" The casual friendliness in his voice, the complete absence of guilt or awareness of what he'd just said about me, was almost worse than the actual words had been. How long had he been talking about me this way? How many times had he and Jessica discussed my supposed neediness and manipulation behind my back? "I brought cookies for Mia," I managed, holding up the container. "Is she home?" "No, she's at a playdate with the neighbors." "But come in, you can leave them for her. Want some coffee?" I followed him into the house, into the kitchen where he'd just been describing me as a burden to his friends. The coffee cups were still on the counter, evidence of the gathering I'd accidentally overheard. "Company?" I asked, nodding at the cups. "Just some guys from work. We're collaborating on a new project." He began loading the cups into the dishwasher, completely at ease. "So are you feeling better?" That was pretty sudden yesterday, the food poisoning. Was he testing me? Seeing if I'd admit to lying about being sick? The casualness of his tone suggested he genuinely didn't think he'd done anything wrong by dismissing my illness and calling me dramatic to his friends. "Much better," I said simply. "I'll just leave these cookies and get going. I have to get back to the bakery." "You work too hard, Mom," he said, the same tone of gentle concern he'd always used when discussing my business. "You should think about cutting back. Maybe hiring more help. You're not getting any younger." The irony of him telling me I worked too hard, minutes after describing my devotion to work as a personal choice that somehow justified his emotional distance, wasn't lost on me. "I'll think about it," I said, setting the cookies on the counter. As I drove back to sweet memories, my mind raced with fragments of the conversation I'd overheard. The dismissiveness, the casual cruelty, the complete lack of awareness of how much I'd sacrificed and contributed to make their lives easier. But more than the hurt, I felt a strange clarity beginning to emerge. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I was seeing my relationship with David and Jessica with complete honesty. I wasn't a beloved mother and grandmother whose help was appreciated. I was a useful but burdensome presence in their lives, someone to be managed and maintained for the benefits I provided while being discussed with frustration and mild contempt when I wasn't around. The question now was what I planned to do about it. That night, I barely slept. The words kept replaying in my head like a broken record. "Mom's becoming such a hassle." Each time I heard David's voice in my memory, it felt like a fresh wound. I kept getting up to pace around my small apartment, making tea I didn't drink, staring out the window at the empty street below. By morning, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to confront David immediately. That would only make him defensive and give him a chance to explain away what I'd heard. Instead, I would start paying closer attention to how our family interactions actually played out. Maybe I'd been blind to the signs, too eager to help to notice when my help wasn't truly wanted. The next few weeks opened my eyes in ways I hadn't expected. It started with small things, details I'd previously overlooked or explained away. When I called David on Sunday morning, as I had every week for years, his greeting was polite but rushed. "Hey, Mom, what's up? We're actually just heading out to run errands." No invitation to join them, no suggestion of a better time to talk. Just a subtle signal that my call was poorly timed. When I mentioned that I'd made a batch of his favorite lemon bars and wondered if I could drop them off, there was a pause. "Oh, that's sweet of you. But Jessica's been trying to cut back on sweets, and we're really trying to support her in that. Maybe just keep them at the bakery for your customers?" Jessica cutting back on sweets was news to me, especially since I'd seen her post photos on social media of elaborate desserts from restaurants they'd visited just days earlier. But I accepted his explanation and tried not to feel hurt that my gesture was unwanted. The following Thursday, when I arrived to pick up Mia from school as usual, She came running up to me with tears in her eyes. "Grandma Lyn, Mommy said I might not be able to come to the bakery today. She said you might be too busy." I knelt down to her level, smoothing her dark hair. "I'm never too busy for you, sweetheart. Did something happen?" Mia shrugged, the way 6-year-olds do when adult conversations confuse them. "Mommy and Daddy were talking this morning, and Mommy said maybe we should give you more space." "I don't know what that means." My heart clenched. Even my relationship with Mia was being questioned now. When I called Jessica to clarify, her tone was carefully neutral. "Oh, hi, Lyn. Yes, I was just thinking that maybe we've been relying on you too much for childcare. I don't want to take advantage of your generosity." "Take advantage of my generosity." The phrase was carefully chosen, designed to sound considerate while actually creating distance. If I protested, I'd seem pushy. If I agreed, I'd be giving up precious time with my granddaughter. "I love spending time with Mia," I said carefully. "It's never an imposition." "I know you do, and she adores you. But I think it's important for her to have more structured activities with children her own age. We've signed her up for an after-school program on Thursdays. The decision had already been made without consulting me. No discussion, no consideration of how much those Thursday afternoons meant to both Mia and me. I was simply informed that my services were no longer needed." "What about the Halloween cookies we were going to make?" I asked, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. She was so excited about them. "Oh, we can do that at home. I bought some pre-made sugar cookies and decorating supplies. It'll be a fun mother-daughter activity." Pre-made cookies instead of the homemade tradition Mia and I had shared for years. The message was clear. I was being replaced, gently, but firmly pushed out of my granddaughter's routine. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Phone calls that were cut short because they had plans. Invitations to family dinners that came with disclaimers about keeping things low-key and suggestions that I didn't need to bring anything. Requests for help that came with elaborate explanations about how they hated to ask, as if my assistance was a burden rather than a gift. The financial requests, however, continued unchanged. David called on a Tuesday evening, his voice carrying that particular tone I'd learned to recognize over the years, apologetic, but expectant. "Mom, I hate to ask, but Jessica's car needs new brakes, and the repair shop wants $800. We're a little tight this month with Mia's new after-school program and some unexpected expenses." I almost asked what unexpected expenses, but caught myself. Since when did I interrogate my son about his financial decisions? Since when did I require justification for helping my family? "Of course," I heard myself saying. "I can transfer the money tomorrow." "You're amazing, Mom. I don't know what we'd do without you." The gratitude felt hollow now, knowing what I knew about how he really saw me. He didn't know what they'd do without my money, certainly. But my actual presence, my emotional support, my love for his daughter, those were inconveniences to be managed. After hanging up, I sat in my quiet apartment feeling like a fool. How long had this been going on? How many times had I interpreted their polite acceptance of my help as genuine appreciation? How many family gatherings had they endured rather than enjoyed? The breaking point came 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in early November. I'd been baking since 4 a.m., preparing for what I expected to be a busy weekend. The bakery was filled with the warm scent of cinnamon rolls and fresh bread when David walked in around 9 o'clock. He looked tired, stressed, and barely managed a smile when he saw me behind the counter. "Mom, we need to talk." Those 4 words sent a chill through me. Nothing good ever followed. "We need to talk." I asked my employee Sarah to handle the front counter and led David to the small office behind the kitchen. "What's going on?" I asked, settling into the chair behind my desk while he remained standing, pacing slightly. "It's about the money, Mom, the help you've been giving us." My stomach dropped. Had they decided they no longer needed my financial support either? Was I about to lose the last connection that made me feel useful to their family? "Jessica and I have been talking, and we think maybe we should formalize things a bit. You know, make it more of a business arrangement rather than these constant individual requests." I stared at him, not understanding. What kind of business arrangement? David pulled out his phone and showed me what looked like a spreadsheet. We've calculated roughly what you contribute monthly, the childcare costs, emergency repairs, miscellaneous expenses. It averages out to about $1,200 a month. $1,200 a month. I had no idea it had added up to that much. We were thinking, he continued, still looking at his phone rather than at me, maybe you could just transfer that amount automatically each month. It would be easier for everyone. We could budget properly, and you wouldn't have to deal with all these random requests. The casualness of it took my breath away. My son was essentially putting me on a payment plan, formalizing my role as their financial support system, while eliminating the personal element entirely. No more individual conversations about specific needs. No more opportunities for me to feel involved in solving their problems. Just a monthly automatic transfer, like paying a utility bill. $1,200 every month, I repeated slowly. Well, maybe not exactly $1,200. Some months might be more, some less. We could review it quarterly and adjust as needed. He finally looked up from his phone, and I saw something in his expression that chilled me, entitlement mixed with slight impatience, as if I was being unreasonably slow to understand a perfectly logical proposal. David, I said carefully, do you realize what you're asking me? I'm asking you to help us in a more organized way. Mom, you know we appreciate everything you do for us. This would just make it easier for everyone. You want me to give you over $14,000 a year? When you put it like that, it sounds like a lot, but it's really just what you're already giving us, spread out more evenly. What I was already giving them. Not what they needed, not what they'd asked for, but what I was already giving them. As if it was an established obligation, rather than a choice I made out of love. And what do I get in return? I asked. The question seemed to surprise him. What do you mean? I mean, in this business arrangement you're proposing, what do I get? What's my benefit? David's face flushed slightly. Mom, you get the satisfaction of helping your family. You get to know that Mia is well cared for, that we're stable and happy. And if you're stable and happy, why do you need $14,000 a year from me? The question hung in the air between us. I watched David struggle with an answer, his face cycling through several emotions before settling on defensive frustration. Look, we're doing well, but Portland is expensive. Housing costs, childcare, everything adds up. We could manage without your help, but it would mean cutting back on things that are important to us. Mia's activities, our savings, being able to live in a good neighborhood. Could manage without my help. There it was, the admission I'd been dreading and hoping for simultaneously. They didn't actually need my assistance. They simply preferred having it to making sacrifices or adjusting their lifestyle. What if I said no? I asked. David's eyes widened slightly. No to what? No to the monthly payments. No to formalizing our financial arrangement. What if I said I wanted to step back from helping you financially? For a moment, he looked genuinely confused, as if the possibility had never occurred to him. But Mom, why would you do that? You've always been so generous with us. Maybe I want to be generous with someone else for a while. Maybe I want to save more for my own retirement, or travel, or donate to charity. Donate to charity? His voice rose slightly. Mom, we're your family. Charity starts at home. The irony of him lecturing me about family loyalty, given what I'd overheard him say about me, was almost overwhelming. But I kept my voice calm. You're right, David. Charity does start at home. But charity is supposed to be given freely, out of love, not demanded or expected. We're not demanding anything. His defensive tone told me otherwise. We're just trying to organize things better. I thought you'd appreciate having a clearer system for taking my money. The thought was uncharitable, but I couldn't shake it. I need to think about this, I said finally. This is a big decision. David's expression shifted to something closer to panic. Think about what? Mom, it's the same help you've always given us, just more organized. I need to think about whether I want to continue giving you $1,200 a month. But we're counting on it. The words came out before he could stop them, revealing the truth underneath all his careful explanations. They weren't asking for my help. They were counting on it, budgeting around it, building their lifestyle on the assumption that my support would continue indefinitely. I understand that, I said quietly. But David, you're a grown man with a good job and a wife who works. At what point do you stop counting on your mother's financial support? He stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. Mom, I don't understand why you're making this complicated. You have the money, we need the help, and you've always been happy to provide it. Happy to provide it. Had I been happy, or had I simply been trying to maintain my connection to his family in the only way that seemed to work? Had I been buying their tolerance of my presence without realizing it? Let me ask you something, I said, leaning back in my chair. If I stopped helping you financially, would you still want me involved in your lives? Of course. The answer came too quickly, too automatically. Mom, your money has nothing to do with our relationship. Really, when was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you invited me over just because you wanted my company, not because you needed something? David's face went through several expressions as he tried to come up with an answer. Finally, he said, "We've been busy lately. Work is crazy. Mia has a lot going on. But that doesn't mean we don't want you around. Then why did Jessica sign Mia up for after-school programs on Thursdays without asking me? Those were our special days together. She thought you might want more time for yourself. She was trying to be considerate. By eliminating the thing I looked forward to most each week without discussing it with me first?" David shifted uncomfortably. Maybe she should have talked to you about it. But Mom, you have to understand. We can't organize our entire lives around your schedule. There it was again, that subtle suggestion that I was overly demanding, too involved, a burden to be managed. The same theme I'd heard him express to his friends, now delivered to my face in more diplomatic language. I never asked you to organize your lives around my schedule, I said. I asked to be included in decisions that affected me, especially when they involved my relationship with my granddaughter. And you are included. We're including you now by proposing this new arrangement. The circular logic was making my head spin. They were including me by creating a system that would reduce our personal interactions to automatic bank transfers. They were being considerate by cutting back on my time with Mia without consulting me. They appreciated my help while describing me as a hassle to their friends. I need time to think, I repeated, standing up from my chair. This isn't a decision I can make right now. David's face showed clear frustration. How much time do you need? Mom, this really isn't that complicated. A few weeks. Maybe a month. A month? His voice cracked slightly. But we have expenses coming up. Jessica's car payment. Mia's registration for winter activities. The higher heating bills with the weather getting colder. All things they'd managed to pay for before I started helping them regularly. All expenses that adults with professional jobs should be able to handle independently. But somehow my assistance had become so integral to their budget that a month without it caused panic. You'll figure it out, I said. You're both smart, capable people. The look David gave me was unlike any I'd ever seen from him before. Angry, hurt, but also calculating. As if he was trying to figure out what had changed, what he'd done wrong, how to fix it. Is this about something I said? Did I do something to upset you? For a moment, I considered telling him the truth. About overhearing his conversation with his friends. About how devastated I'd been to learn how he really saw me. But something held me back. Maybe it was the hope that he'd realize on his own how his behavior had affected me. Maybe it was the fear that confronting him directly would only make him better at hiding his true feelings. This is about me figuring out what I want my role in your family to be, I said instead. I'm 68 years old, David. I won't be around forever, and I need to make sure I'm using my remaining time and resources wisely. Mom, don't talk like that. You're healthy. You could live another 20 years easily. Exactly, 20 years. Do I want to spend them being a bank account for my adult son? Or do I want to do something else with my life? The question visibly shook him. For the first time in our conversation, he seemed to grasp that I might actually be serious about reconsidering our arrangement. What else would you do? He asked, and there was genuine confusion in his voice, as if he couldn't imagine what I might want beyond serving his family's needs. I don't know yet. Travel, maybe. Expand the bakery. Volunteer for causes I care about. Date someone. I'm a widow, not dead. David's face went pale at the mention of dating. You want a date? I want to live, David. I want to have a life that's about more than working and helping you pay your bills. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but they felt true in a way that surprised me. When had my life become so narrow? When had I stopped thinking about my own wants and needs? I didn't realize you felt that way, David said quietly. I didn't realize it either until recently. We stood there looking at each other, both processing this shift in our relationship. Finally, David picked up his phone and put it back in his pocket. So what happens now? He asked. Now you go home and figure out how to manage your expenses without counting on my help. And I figure out what I want my life to look like going forward. And what about us? What about our relationship? I don't know, David, I really don't know. He started to say something else, then stopped himself. I should go. Jessica's expecting me to pick up groceries. Of course. I walked him out through the bakery, past the customers enjoying their Saturday morning pastries, past Sarah, who was carefully arranging the display case. At the door, David turned back to me. Mom, I love you. I hope you know that. I know you think you do, I replied, and immediately regretted how cold it sounded. David's face crumpled slightly. What does that mean? It means I need to figure out the difference between being loved and being useful. After he left, I stood behind the counter in a daze, mechanically helping customers while my mind raced. Sarah kept glancing at me with concern, finally asking if I was feeling all right. Just tired, I told her, which wasn't entirely untrue. I was exhausted from pretending, from making excuses, from trying to maintain relationships that might not actually exist the way I thought they did. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went through the motions of running the bakery, but my heart wasn't in it. Every interaction felt forced. Every smile felt fake. By closing time, I was emotionally drained. That evening, I called Carol and asked if she wanted to have dinner. She took one look at my face when I arrived at the restaurant and ordered a bottle of wine instead of her usual single glass. What happened? She asked simply. I told her everything. The overheard conversation, the gradual realization of how my family really saw me, David's proposal to formalize our financial arrangement, the growing distance between us despite my continued support. Carol listened without interrupting, occasionally shaking her head or making small sympathetic noises. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Honey, she said finally, I hate being right about things like this. You tried to warn me. I tried to warn you because I've been where you are. Not with kids. I never had any. But with family who saw me as a resource rather than a person. It's painful to recognize, but it's better than living in denial. What did you do when you realized it? Carol swirled her wine thoughtfully. I cut them off. Completely. Stopped lending money. Stopped offering help. Stopped being available for every crisis. Some of them disappeared from my life entirely. Others eventually came back with more respect for my boundaries. Did you regret it? Sometimes. There were holidays that were lonely, birthdays that passed unnoticed. But you know what I didn't regret? I didn't regret discovering who actually cared about me versus who just cared about what I could do for them. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The question, Carol continued, is what you're willing to tolerate going forward. Are you okay being a checkbook with legs, or do you want more from your relationships? I want more. I just don't know if more is possible with David and Jessica. Then you need to find out. And the only way to find out is to change the dynamic and see how they respond. By cutting off the money? By setting boundaries. By requiring them to treat you with the respect you deserve. By making it clear that your love and support aren't unconditional. They come with the expectation of basic human decency. That night, lying in bed, I thought about Carol's words. Basic human decency. Such a simple concept, but when had I stopped expecting it from my own son? When had I started accepting dismissive treatment and casual cruelty as the price of maintaining family relationships? I thought about Mia and how much it would hurt to see less of her, But what was I teaching her by accepting disrespectful treatment from her parents? What kind of example was I setting about how women should expect to be treated? I thought about the bakery, about the customers who genuinely appreciated what I did, about the employees who respected my work and dedication. I had a life beyond David and Jessica, a life I'd been neglecting in my efforts to maintain my role in their family. By Monday morning, I'd made my decision. It was time to find out what my relationships were really worth when they weren't subsidized by my checkbook. The first step was the hardest. I called my bank and canceled the automatic transfers I'd set up over the years for various recurring expenses of David and Jessica's. Mia's after-school program fees, their gym memberships, the extra payment on their car loan that I'd been making to help them pay it off faster. The second step was emotional preparation. I knew David would call as soon as he realized the money had stopped flowing. I needed to be ready with clear, calm explanations that didn't leave room for argument or manipulation. The third step was the hardest of all. I had to be prepared for the possibility that this would end our relationship entirely. That David would choose his comfortable lifestyle over repairing things with his mother. That I might lose access to Mia in the process. But I also had to be prepared for the possibility that things might actually improve. That David might realize what he was losing and make an effort to rebuild our relationship on more equal terms. That we might find our way back to each other as family members, who genuinely cared about each other's well-being. As I opened Sweet Memories that Tuesday morning, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the anticipation of change. For better or worse, my life was about to be different. And for the first time in a long time, I was the one making that choice. The call came exactly 3 days after I'd canceled the automatic payments, right in the middle of the Wednesday morning rush at Sweet Memories. I was helping a regular customer choose between my maple pecan scones and blueberry muffins when my phone rang. David's name flashed on the screen and my stomach immediately tightened. "Sarah, can you take over for a minute?" I asked my employee, who nodded and stepped up to the register with practiced ease. I retreated to my small office behind the kitchen, closing the door and taking a deep breath before answering. "Hello, David?" "Mom, what the hell is going on?" His voice was strained, angry in a way I rarely heard from him. "Jessica just called me at work because Mia's after-school program payment bounced. They're threatening to drop her from the program." No greeting, no concern for my well-being, just straight to the accusation. I'd expected this, but it still stung. "I canceled the automatic payment," I said calmly. "You canceled it? Why? Did something go wrong with your bank account?" He was giving me an out, a chance to claim it was a mistake or technical error. The old me might have taken it, might have apologized and rushed to fix the problem immediately. Nothing went wrong. I decided to stop making that payment. Silence stretched between us for several seconds. I could hear office noise in the background, phones ringing, conversations. The normal sounds of a workplace that suddenly seemed very far away from this conversation. "Mom, I don't understand. We talked about this on Saturday. I thought we agreed that you'd continue helping us. Actually, you proposed that I formalize giving you $1,200 a month. I said I needed time to think about it. This is me thinking about it. By sabotaging Mia's after-school care?" His voice rose, drawing what sounded like attention from his coworkers. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Jessica had to beg them not to remove Mia from the program while we sort this out. Sabotaging. Embarrassing." Not once did he acknowledge that I'd been paying for something that wasn't my responsibility, or express gratitude for the months of support I'd already provided. "David, Mia's after-school care is your and Jessica's responsibility, not mine. You're her parents." "Of course we're her parents." "But Mom, you offered to help with these expenses. We built our budget around your contributions." "I offered to help occasionally, in emergencies. I didn't agree to permanently subsidize your lifestyle choices." Another long pause. When David spoke again, his voice had shifted from anger to something closer to panic. "Mom, are you having some kind of breakdown? This isn't like you at all. You love Mia, you've always wanted to help her succeed." A breakdown, because choosing not to fund my adult son's expenses indicated mental instability rather than a reasonable boundary. I do love Mia. That's exactly why I'm doing this. How is cutting off her after-school program helping Mia? I'm not cutting off anything. You and Jessica are perfectly capable of paying for your daughter's activities. You just prefer not to when you can get someone else to do it. Someone else? David's voice cracked. Mom, you're not someone else. You're family. You're Mia's grandmother. Exactly. I'm her grandmother, not her financial provider. There's a difference. I heard him take a shaky breath. In the background, someone was calling his name, probably wondering why he was having an emotional phone conversation at work. I can't deal with this right now, he said. I have a meeting in 10 minutes. But Mom, we need to fix this. Mia can't suffer because you're going through whatever this is. The only person making Mia suffer is you, by building a budget you can't sustain and then panicking when reality hits. I'm coming over tonight after work. We're going to talk about this properly. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat in my office chair, staring at the phone, processing the conversation. David was coming over, which meant Jessica probably was too. They were going to try to fix this, which in their minds likely meant convincing me to restore their financial support. I felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation. Part of me wanted to avoid the confrontation entirely, to restore the payments and pretend this conversation had never happened. But a larger part of me felt energized for the first time in months. I was finally standing up for myself, finally refusing to be taken for granted. The rest of the day passed in a haze of routine bakery tasks, punctuated by anxious thoughts about the evening ahead. Sarah noticed my distraction and offered to stay late to help with closing, but I declined. I needed the familiar ritual of cleaning and organizing to calm my nerves. By 6 o'clock, Sweet Memories was spotless and ready for the next day. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, changed out of my flour-dusted work clothes, and tried to prepare mentally for whatever was coming. They arrived at 7:30, both of them looking grim and determined. David had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, his usual gesture when he was preparing for a difficult conversation. Jessica wore one of her perfectly tailored work outfits, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun that made her look like she was heading into a business negotiation. Which, I supposed, she was. "Hi, Mom," David said, leaning in for his customary hug. I returned it stiffly, aware that Jessica was watching our interaction with calculating eyes. "Lyn," Jessica nodded, her smile tight and professional. "Thank you for making time to talk with us." I led them into my small living room, offering coffee or tea that they both declined. We sat in the same positions we'd occupied countless times before, David and Jessica on the couch, me in the armchair across from them. But the atmosphere was completely different, charged with tension and unspoken accusations. "So," David began, settling back into the cushions as if he was preparing for a long discussion, "let's figure out what's going on here." "I think I was pretty clear on the phone," I said. "I've decided to stop subsidizing your expenses." Jessica leaned forward, her real estate agent persona in full effect. "Lyn, we completely understand if you're feeling taken for granted. That's the last thing we'd ever want. You've been incredibly generous with us, and we appreciate it more than you know." The words were perfect, diplomatic, designed to make me feel heard while steering the conversation toward their desired outcome. I'd watched Jessica use similar tactics with difficult clients, acknowledging their concerns while guiding them toward the decision she wanted them to make. "If we've done something to make you feel unappreciated," she continued, "please tell us what it is. We want to make this right." "You want to make this right?" I repeated. "Okay. Tell me about the conversation David had with his work friends last month. The one where he described me as a hassle who doesn't understand boundaries." David's face went white. Jessica turned to look at him with confusion, clearly unaware of what I was referring to. "I don't know what you're talking about," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You don't remember telling your colleagues that I'm becoming such a hassle? That I'm always showing up, always wanting to help with Mia, always asking about your finances? You don't remember laughing when they compared me to other difficult family members?" Jessica's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as she watched David's face confirm my accusations. "Mom, David started, then stopped, running his hands through his hair. "You weren't supposed to hear that. So you admit you said it?" I was frustrated that day. You'd canceled babysitting Mia at the last minute, and I had to miss an important meeting. I was venting to my friends. You were sick, Jessica interjected, finally understanding the situation. David, you told me she was genuinely ill. She was, but the timing was terrible, and I said some things I shouldn't have said. What things? Jessica's voice was sharp now, her business composure cracking. What exactly did you say about your mother? I watched David squirm as he tried to decide how much to admit. Finally, he seemed to realize that denial was pointless. I said she was becoming too involved in our lives. That she acts like we owe her something for her help. That she doesn't respect our boundaries. Jessica stared at him in disbelief. David, she pays for half of Mia's expenses and watches her every week. She's never asked for anything in return. That's what I told them, David said defensively. I said she chooses to help, that we don't force her to do anything. But you also told them I was lonely and dramatic, I added. You said I act like you're responsible for entertaining me. You said it's exhausting dealing with my supposed guilt trips. Jessica's face had gone pale. She turned to David with an expression I'd never seen before. Not just anger, but genuine shock. How could you say those things? Your mother has been nothing but supportive of us. Jessica, you don't understand. You weren't there. My friends were all sharing stories about difficult family members, and I just got caught up in it. I didn't mean most of what I said. Which parts did you mean? I asked quietly. David looked at me with something approaching desperation. Mom, please. I was having a bad day, I was stressed about work, and I said things that came out wrong. It doesn't represent how I really feel about you. Doesn't it? Because everything that's happened since then suggests it does represent your feelings. The distance, the casual dismissal of my illness, the proposal to formalize our financial arrangement so you could avoid the inconvenience of individual requests. Jessica was still staring at David as if she didn't recognize him. Is that true? Did you really ask her to set up automatic payments? I thought it would be more organized, David mumbled. More organized? David, that's not organization, that's treating your mother like a bank. I felt a flicker of gratitude toward Jessica, even though our relationship had always been strained. At least someone in their marriage understood how inappropriate David's proposal had been. Look, David said, standing up and beginning to pace around my small living room. Maybe I handled things badly. Maybe I said things I shouldn't have said. But the bottom line is, we're family. Family helps each other. Family doesn't just cut each other off over misunderstandings. You're right, I said. Family does help each other. But it should go both ways. When was the last time you helped me with anything? David stopped pacing. What do you mean? I mean, when was the last time you offered to help me with the bakery when I was short-staffed? When was the last time you invited me over just because you wanted my company? When was the last time you asked how I was feeling, what I needed, what my dreams were? Mom, you never ask for help. You always seem to have everything under control. Because I learned early on that asking for help from you means being told how busy you are, how stressed you are, how many demands you already have on your time. Jessica had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now she spoke up. Lyn, you're right. We haven't been good about reciprocating your support. I can see that now. I looked at her with surprise. Jessica had never admitted fault in our interactions before. But, she continued. Cutting us off completely seems like an extreme response. Couldn't we work out a better balance? Maybe we could help you more while still maintaining some of the financial support for Mia's activities? There it was, the negotiation, the attempt to find a compromise that would restore their access to my money while making minimal changes to their behavior. Jessica, it's not about balance. It's about respect. And David's conversation with his friends showed me that despite all the help I've given you over the years, he fundamentally doesn't respect me. That's not true, David protested. I do respect you, Mom. I've always respected you. Respected people don't get described as hassles to be managed. Respected people don't get their illnesses dismissed as dramatic performances. Respected people don't get treated like ATMs who should be grateful for the opportunity to fund their adult children's lifestyle choices. David sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. I messed up, I know I messed up. But cutting us off isn't going to fix anything. I'm not cutting you off, David. I'm establishing boundaries. There's a difference. What kind of boundaries? Jessica asked, still in negotiation mode. The boundary that says I'm your mother and grandmother, not your financial safety net. The boundary that says if you want my help, you ask respectfully and accept no for an answer. The boundary that says my time and resources have value and shouldn't be taken for granted. But what about Mia? David's voice was plaintive now, almost childlike. She didn't do anything wrong. Why should she suffer because we had a disagreement? Mia isn't suffering. Mia has two parents who are perfectly capable of providing for her needs. She'll continue to have a relationship with me, but it won't be contingent on me funding her activities. Her after-school program costs $200 a month, Jessica said. We can probably manage it, but it'll be tight. Then maybe she doesn't need to be in an after-school program. Maybe she could come home with one of you, or go to a friend's house, or spend that time with me at the bakery like she used to. The program is good for her, David argued. She's learning Spanish and taking art classes. It's enriching. So is spending time with her grandmother, learning about running a business, helping customers, developing a work ethic. But you decided those Thursday afternoons were inconvenient for your schedules. Jessica and David exchanged a look. Finally, Jessica spoke. We thought you might want more time for yourself. You work so hard, and you're getting older. You thought I might want more time for myself, so you made the decision for me without asking what I actually wanted? We were trying to be considerate, David said weakly. No, you were trying to reduce your dependence on me while maintaining your access to my money. You wanted the financial support without the personal relationship. The accusation hung in the air between us. I watched both of them process it, seeing recognition dawn in their faces. That's not. Jessica started, then stopped. Maybe we did approach it wrong. You approached it like a business decision, because that's what I'd become to you. A business relationship. A vendor who provided childcare and financial support in exchange for limited access to your family. Mom, that's harsh, David said, but he didn't deny it. It's honest. And I'm done pretending otherwise. We sat in silence for several minutes. Outside, I could hear the evening sounds of the city. Cars passing, people walking home from dinner, the distant hum of traffic. Normal life continuing while my family relationships crumbled in my living room. Finally, Jessica spoke. What would it take for us to rebuild this relationship properly? I considered the question carefully. What did I want from them? An apology would be nice, but apologies without changed behavior were meaningless. Financial independence would be better, but even that wouldn't address the underlying disrespect. I want you to figure out how to manage your lives without my financial support, I said finally. For at least 6 months. I want to see that you can be responsible adults who don't need their mother and grandmother to subsidize their choices. 6 months? David looked panicked. Mom, that's not realistic. We have commitments, obligations. You have commitments and obligations that you made while counting on my money. That's exactly the problem. You've organized your entire lifestyle around my support without ever asking if I wanted that responsibility. We didn't realize you felt that way, Jessica said softly. Because you never asked. In 5 years, neither of you has ever asked me how I felt about the money I was giving you, or what I might want to do with it instead, or whether supporting you was preventing me from pursuing my own goals and dreams. What goals and dreams? David asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice for the first time in the conversation. The question caught me off guard. What were my goals and dreams? I'd been so focused on supporting their goals and dreams that I'd stopped thinking about my own. I don't know yet, I admitted. I haven't given myself permission to think about it. But I'd like to find out. And you can't do that while still helping us? Jessica asked. Not when helping you has become my primary identity. Not when every decision I make has to be filtered through the question of how it affects your budget. David leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Mom, I hear what you're saying, I really do. But 6 months seems extreme. What if we compromise? What if we reduce the amount of help we accept from you, but don't eliminate it entirely? What if you prove you don't need it at all before asking me to provide it? The suggestion clearly terrified them both. I could see them mentally calculating their expenses, trying to figure out what they'd have to give up or change. We'll have to move, Jessica said quietly. The rent on this house is too high without your contributions. Then move. Mia's settled in her school district. She has friends here. Kids are resilient. She'll make new friends. We'll have to give up our gym memberships, cancel our streaming services, stop eating out as much, David added, his voice getting more strained with each sacrifice. Those sound like normal adult decisions that most people make when managing a budget. They sat there absorbing the reality of living within their actual means, without the cushion of my financial support. It was clearly a foreign concept to them. What about emergencies? Jessica asked. What if the car breaks down, or one of us gets sick, or something unexpected happens? What do other people do when emergencies happen? They have savings, they adjust their spending, they ask their bank for a loan, they figure it out. But we're not other people, David said desperately. We're your family. Exactly. You're my family, which means I love you enough to let you learn to stand on your own feet. I love you enough to stop enabling your dependence on me. The word enabling seemed to hit David like a physical blow. He sat back against the couch cushions, staring at me with a mixture of hurt and recognition. Is that what you think you've been doing? Enabling us? I think I've been preventing you from growing into the independent adults you should be. I think I've been robbing you of the satisfaction and confidence that comes from managing your own lives successfully. Jessica was crying now, quiet tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. I never thought about it that way. I never gave you reason to think about it that way. I made it so easy to accept my help that you stopped questioning whether you should. David stood up again, this time walking to the window that looked out over the street. So what happens now? We just figure it out on our own? You figure it out on your own, and maybe, if you can prove that you can manage your lives without my financial support, we can rebuild our relationship on more equal terms. More equal how? Jessica asked. Equal meaning I'm not just a resource to be managed, but a person whose feelings and needs matter. Equal meaning our time together is about enjoying each other's company, not about what I can provide for you. Equal meaning my love and support are valued, not just taken for granted. They both nodded, though I could see the uncertainty in their faces. This conversation had clearly been more than they'd expected, more than they'd prepared for. Can we still see you? David asked, turning from the window. Can Mia still visit her grandmother? Of course, but the visits will be about spending time together, not about me, providing free childcare while you do other things. And they'll happen when it works for both of us, not just when it's convenient for your schedule. That sounds fair, Jessica said, though her voice suggested she wasn't entirely sure it was. And if we do this, if we prove we can be financially independent, what happens then? David asked. Then we see if we can build the kind of relationship we should have had all along. One based on mutual respect and genuine affection, not financial dependence and obligation. They stayed for another hour, asking questions, seeking clarification, trying to understand this new dynamic I was proposing. It was the longest conversation we'd had in years that wasn't focused on their needs or problems. For the first time in recent memory, they seemed genuinely interested in my perspective, my feelings, my experience of our relationship. When they finally left, I felt emotionally drained but strangely hopeful. The conversation had been painful, but it had also been honest in a way our interactions hadn't been for years. Whether they could actually follow through on becoming financially independent remained to be seen. Whether they could learn to value me as a person rather than just as a resource was even less certain. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was worth finding out. The first month after our confrontation was the longest of my life. I kept expecting David to call, to check in, to at least acknowledge the seismic shift in our relationship. Instead, there was silence. Complete, deafening silence that stretched on day after day until I began to wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake. Carol found me crying into my coffee one Tuesday morning, sitting alone in sweet memories after the early rush had ended. She took one look at my red-rimmed eyes and locked the front door, flipping the sign to "Back in 15 minutes." "Honey, what's happening?" she asked, settling into the chair across from me at my small corner table. "I haven't heard from David in 3 weeks," I managed between shaky breaths. "Not a single phone call, not even a text message. What if I've lost them forever? What if I've lost Mia?" Carol reached across and squeezed my hand. "What did you expect? That they'd immediately become grateful and appreciative? Lyn, you cut off their money supply. They're probably scrambling to figure out how to pay their bills. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I should have been more gradual about it. Listen to yourself. You're already second-guessing the healthiest decision you've made in years." But the doubt gnawed at me constantly. Every time my phone rang, my heart leaped with hope that it might be David. Every time it wasn't, the disappointment felt fresh. I found myself driving past their neighborhood on my way to the grocery store, taking the long way just to see if their cars were in the driveway, if there were any signs of how they were managing. It was during one of these pathetic reconnaissance missions that I saw the "For Rent" sign in their front yard. My heart stopped. They were moving, just as Jessica had predicted. The house that had seemed so important to their social status, so necessary for Mia's stability, was being abandoned because they couldn't afford it without my help. I sat in my car across the street, staring at that sign and feeling like the worst mother in the world. Had I really driven my son's family out of their home? Was my need for respect worth making my granddaughter move to a new neighborhood, possibly a new school? But then I remembered David's words to his friends. How he'd laughed about my supposed neediness, how he'd dismissed my illness as drama, how he'd described me as a burden to be managed. I remembered the casual entitlement in his voice when he'd proposed turning me into an automatic payment system. I remembered Jessica's cold calculation as she'd evaluated my house, already planning how to manipulate me into buying them their dream home. I drove home without stopping, but the doubt lingered. 2 weeks later, I was closing the bakery when I saw a familiar small figure pressed against the front window, her breath fogging the glass as she peered inside. Mia. My heart soared with joy and terror in equal measure. I unlocked the door quickly. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here?" She launched herself into my arms with the abandon that only 6-year-olds can manage. "Grandma Lyn, I missed you so much. Mommy said we couldn't visit because you were busy, but I walked here by myself to surprise you." My blood ran cold. Walked here by herself? Their new apartment was at least 8 blocks away, across several busy streets. "Mia, honey, does Mommy know where you are?" Her face crumpled slightly. She was on the phone with the insurance people about Daddy's car. She seemed really upset, so I didn't want to bother her. But I wanted to see you so bad, and I remembered the way to sweet memories. Before I could respond, I heard running footsteps on the sidewalk. Jessica appeared, looking frantic and furious in equal measure. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and she was breathing hard from running. "Mia! Oh my God, there you are!" She swept her daughter up in a fierce hug before turning to me with eyes blazing. "Did you tell her to come here? Did you put her up to this?" The accusation hit me like a slap. "Of course not! I found her looking through the window." "Jessica, she walked here alone from your new place. She could have been hurt." "Don't lecture me about my daughter's safety," Jessica snapped. But I could see the fear underneath her anger. "We've been dealing with one crisis after another since you decided to cut us off. I can't watch her every second." "What kind of crises?" I asked, despite myself. Jessica's composure cracked completely. "David's car broke down and we can't afford to fix it, so he's been taking buses to work and getting written up for being late. The new apartment has a mold problem, and the landlord won't fix it unless we threaten to move. But we can't move because we can't afford another deposit. Mia's been asking for you constantly, and I don't know what to tell her because I don't understand what happened between you and David." I looked down at Mia, who was clinging to my leg and watching her mother with worried eyes. This wasn't her fault. None of this was her fault. "Would you like to come upstairs for a few minutes?" I offered carefully. "I could make some tea while Mia has some cookies." Jessica hesitated, clearly torn between pride and exhaustion. Finally, she nodded. My small apartment felt even smaller with Jessica's tension filling it, but Mia immediately made herself at home, chattering about her new school, her new bedroom. how much she missed our Thursday afternoon baking sessions. As I listened to her, I felt my resolve wavering again. "Jessica," I said quietly while Mia was distracted with her cookies, "you could have called me. If there were emergencies, if you needed help with Mia, you could have reached out. After the things you said? After you made it clear that we were nothing but financial burdens to you?" Jessica's voice was bitter. "David has been a mess since that night. He keeps saying he ruined everything, that he destroyed our family over a stupid conversation with his coworkers. It wasn't about one conversation. It was about a pattern of behavior that had been building for years. Maybe so, but the result is the same. We're struggling to keep our heads above water. Mia doesn't understand why she can't see her grandmother anymore, and David is convinced you hate him." I watched Mia carefully arranging her cookie crumbs into patterns on the plate, completely absorbed in her small task. How had I let things get so complicated? How had standing up for myself turned into punishing an innocent child? "I don't hate David," I said softly. "I never could. But I also can't go back to being taken for granted." "Then what do you want from us?" Jessica's question was raw, desperate. "Because we're drowning here, Lyn. And I know you think we deserve it, but Mia doesn't deserve it." Before I could answer, my phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, and my heart clenched. It was the first time he'd called since our confrontation. "Mom?" His voice sounded strained, exhausted. "Is Mia with you?" Jessica said she ran away and she thought maybe. "She's here," I assured him. "She's safe." I heard him exhale shakily. "Thank God. I've been driving around looking for her for the past hour. My car started making this horrible noise and I was afraid it was going to break down before I found her." "David, we need to talk." "I know. God, Mom, I know. I've been trying to work up the courage to call you for weeks. Everything's falling apart here, and I keep thinking about what you said, about how we took you for granted, and I don't know how to fix it." "Come pick up Mia. We'll talk when you get here." When David arrived 20 minutes later, he looked terrible. Thinner than I'd ever seen him, with dark circles under his eyes and a defeated slump to his shoulders. He hugged Mia tightly, as if he'd been afraid he might never see her again. "We live in an apartment now," Mia announced cheerfully, oblivious to the adult tension around her. "It's smaller than our old house, but I have my own room, and Mommy says it's an adventure." David's eyes met mine over Mia's head, and I saw years of exhaustion and stress compressed into that single look. This wasn't the entitled, demanding son who'd wanted to formalize our financial arrangement. This was a man who'd been forced to confront the reality of his own limitations. "Can you watch Mia for a few minutes while Jessica and I step outside?" he asked quietly. I nodded, settling onto the couch with my granddaughter while her parents went to have what I assumed would be a difficult conversation on my small balcony. Through the glass door, I could see them talking intensely, Jessica gesturing, David running his hands through his hair in that familiar gesture of stress. "Grandma Lyn," Mia said, snuggling against my side, "are you mad at Mommy and Daddy?" The question pierced my heart. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, but that doesn't mean we don't love each other." "But you don't come see us anymore." "And Mommy cries sometimes when she thinks I'm not looking." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of all the unintended consequences of my decision. I'd wanted respect, recognition, a healthier dynamic with my son's family. Instead, I'd created chaos and pain for everyone, including the one person who'd never done anything wrong. When David and Jessica came back inside, their faces were grim but determined. "Mom," David said, sitting across from me while Jessica took the chair beside him. "We've been talking, and we want to apologize, not just for the immediate crisis, but for how we treated you for years before this happened." I waited, not trusting myself to speak. "I did say those things about you to my coworkers," he continued, his voice thick with shame. "And I meant them in the moment, which makes it worse. I was frustrated and I took it out on you, and I made you sound like a burden when the truth is, you were the only thing keeping us afloat." "We took your help for granted," Jessica added. "We built our whole lifestyle around your generosity and then acted like it was our right, rather than your choice. That was wrong." "And now?" I asked carefully. David looked at Jessica, who nodded encouragingly. Now we're learning what it actually costs to live without a safety net. And it's terrifying, Mom. We're one emergency away from real trouble. But we're also learning things about ourselves that maybe we needed to learn. Like what? Like how much we were spending on things we didn't actually need. Like how little we knew about managing money properly. Like how much we'd gotten used to having you solve our problems instead of solving them ourselves. Jessica leaned forward. We've had to make some hard choices these past few weeks. The gym memberships, the premium cable package, eating out 3 times a week, all gone. We've had to learn how to cook more meals at home, how to budget for groceries, how to say no to Mia when she wants things we can't afford. And, I prompted, and it's been good for us in some ways, David admitted reluctantly. We're talking more about our finances instead of just assuming you'll cover whatever we can't. We're being more creative about entertainment, spending more time together as a family instead of always going out. But it's also been incredibly hard, Jessica added. The apartment we could afford is in a rougher neighborhood. The mold problem is real, and fixing it is going to cost money we don't have. David's been walking to work when his car won't start, which means he's exhausted all the time. Are you asking me to resume helping you? I asked bluntly. They exchanged another look. Finally, David shook his head. We want to prove to you that we can manage on our own. But we also want our family back, Mom. We want Mia to be able to see her grandmother. We want to have a relationship with you that isn't based on money. Even if that means continuing to struggle financially? Even if it means that, Jessica said firmly. Because you were right. We weren't treating you like family. We were treating you like a resource. And we lost something precious in the process. I looked at Mia, who had fallen asleep against my shoulder during her parents' conversation, her small face peaceful and trusting. Whatever else happened, I couldn't let my relationship with her become a casualty of the adult conflicts around her. What are you proposing? I asked. Supervised visits, David said with a slight smile. Like divorced parents. You can see Mia regularly, but we handle all the financial stuff ourselves. And maybe, over time, if we can prove that we've learned to respect you properly, we can rebuild the rest of our relationship. And the emergencies? The mold problem? The car repairs? We figure them out ourselves. We ask for loans from the bank if we have to, or we do without things we thought we needed. We learn to live within our actual means. It wasn't everything I'd wanted from our confrontation, but it was a start. More importantly, it was acknowledgement that things needed to change, that I deserved better treatment than I'd been receiving. I'd like that, I said softly. I've missed you, all of you. But especially this little one. David's eyes filled with tears. I've missed you too, Mom, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for making you feel like a burden when you're the most generous, loving person I know. As Jessica gathered their things and David gently lifted Mia to carry her to the car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not for a return to the old dynamic, but for the possibility of building something better. Something based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. Something that honored both my love for my family and my need to be valued as more than just a source of support. It would be a slow process, rebuilding trust and establishing new boundaries. But for the first time in years, I felt like we were moving in the right direction. And perhaps most importantly, I felt like I had reclaimed my sense of self-worth. My understanding that love shouldn't come at the cost of dignity. The road ahead wouldn't be easy for any of us, but at least we were finally walking it together, as equals. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my expanded bakery, watching Mia carefully measure flour for a batch of her favorite chocolate chip cookies. The new space was 3 times the size of my original sweet memories, complete with a teaching kitchen where I offered weekend baking classes for children and adults. Is this enough, Grandma Lyn? Mia asked, holding up the measuring cup with the serious concentration of a 7-year-old who took her baking responsibilities very seriously. Perfect, sweetheart. You're getting so good at this. It was our new Saturday morning tradition. David would drop Mia off at 9, and she'd spend the morning helping me prepare for the weekend rush while learning basic baking skills. At noon, he'd return to pick her up, usually staying for lunch and genuine conversation about our lives. The transformation in our relationship hadn't happened overnight. but it had been steady and real. David had kept his word about managing their finances independently. They'd moved to a better apartment after saving enough for a proper deposit, and while it wasn't as luxurious as their old house, it was clean, safe, and truly theirs. More importantly, David had started treating me like a person whose thoughts and feelings mattered. He called every week just to check in, not because he needed something, but because he wanted to maintain our connection. He asked about my business plans, my health, even my social life, with genuine interest rather than polite obligation. Jessica had surprised me the most. Once freed from the pressure of managing their lifestyle around my financial contributions, she'd become more relaxed, more authentic. She'd even started bringing me small gifts when she picked up Mia. Nothing expensive, just thoughtful gestures that showed she was thinking of me as more than just Mia's grandmother. "Mom?" David's voice called from the front of the bakery. "We're here for pickup duty." I smiled, wiping my hands on my apron. These Saturday exchanges had become the highlight of my week, a perfect blend of family time and respect for boundaries. David appeared in the doorway of the teaching kitchen, followed by Jessica, who was carrying a small potted plant. "How's my favorite baker doing today?" he asked, ruffling Mia's hair as she beamed with pride at her cookie-making progress. "We made 3 dozen cookies, and I only spilled flour once," Mia announced. "And Grandma Lyn said I can help her teach the kids' class next weekend." "That's wonderful, honey," Jessica said, then turned to me with a slightly shy smile. "This is for you, Lyn. I saw it at the farmer's market and thought you might like it for your apartment window." The plant was a small lavender bush, fragrant and perfectly sized for my kitchen windowsill. It was exactly the kind of thoughtful gesture I'd always hoped for from my daughter-in-law. Personal, considerate, given without expectation of reciprocation. "It's beautiful, Jessica." "Thank you." As Mia packed up her cookies to take home, David lingered near the industrial ovens, watching me work with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What's on your mind?" I asked, recognizing his thoughtful mood. "I've been thinking about what you said that night, about having dreams and goals that got pushed aside. Have you figured out what those are yet?" The question caught me off guard. Over the past months, I'd been so focused on rebuilding our relationship and expanding the bakery that I hadn't given much thought to the broader question of what I wanted from the rest of my life. "I'm still figuring it out," I admitted. "But I know this feels right. The expanded bakery, the teaching classes, having time for relationships that aren't based on what I can provide." "You seem happier," Jessica observed, joining our conversation while Mia played with the mixing bowls. "More yourself, if that makes sense." It did make sense. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living my own life rather than existing as a supporting character in everyone else's story. "I am happier," I realized as I said it. "I'm proud of what I've built here, and I'm proud of how we've worked through our family issues. Most of all, I'm proud that I finally stood up for myself when it mattered." David's face grew serious. "I'm sorry it took us so long to appreciate what we had in you, Mom. I'm sorry you had to demand respect instead of receiving it naturally." "The important thing is that we got here eventually," I replied, meaning it. "Some families never learn to have these conversations." As they prepared to leave, Mia ran back to hug me goodbye, her small arms wrapping around my waist with fierce affection. "I love you, Grandma Lyn," she whispered. "Thanks for teaching me how to make cookies and for always making time for me." "I love you too, sweetheart. I always will." After they left, I stood alone in my expanded bakery, surrounded by the evidence of everything I'd built. Not just the successful business, but the healthy relationships, the mutual respect, the sense of my own worth that had been missing for so many years. My phone buzzed with a text from Carol. "Dinner tonight? I want to hear about your date yesterday with that handsome customer who keeps ordering apple turnovers." I laughed, remembering the pleasant evening I'd spent with Robert, a retired teacher who'd been frequenting Sweet Memories for months before finally asking me to join him for coffee. At 68, I was discovering that there were still adventures to be had, still connections to be made with people who valued me for who I was, rather than what I could provide. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of my bakery, illuminating the flour dust that danced in the air like tiny golden particles. I breathed deeply, inhaling the familiar scents of yeast and cinnamon that had defined my life for over 2 decades. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new customers, new opportunities to create something beautiful and nourishing. Mia would continue growing up with a grandmother who modeled self-respect and independence. David and Jessica would continue building their marriage on a foundation of genuine partnership rather than external support. And I would continue discovering who I was when I wasn't defined by my usefulness to others. When I was simply Lyn, baker, teacher, mother, grandmother, woman with dreams and boundaries and the courage to enforce both. The girl who'd once helped her grandmother knead bread on Saturday mornings had grown into a woman who understood that love without respect wasn't really love at all, and that understanding had set all of us free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.